So, hello, welcome to Beyond the Swipe podcast. I am your host, Bernardo Mejia. I am a 20-year-old second generation entrepreneur. And today, what I want to do on this very first episode is introduce my story of entrepreneurship and how I've built multiple businesses in my early 20s and how I got to this point. And really, what this podcast is all about, it's really about the entrepreneurship spirit and the great things that it can achieve when we apply discipline, focus, and very important things of the mindset. And then we get into the nitty gritty stuff about business, such as payments, sales, marketing, and everything that makes a business run. But today, what I wanted to talk about is who I am, what I'm made of, what makes me who I am, and first and foremost, being a second generation entrepreneur, I got to see very early on the grit and the skills that it takes to build a business from the ground up. From a very early stage, I saw it within my own family. So I came to this country when I was 6 years old. I was raised here in Virginia, and very early on, I saw my mother run a retail store. She had a retail store in El Salvador. She would sell sodas, she would sell snacks to the local neighborhood there, and my grandma had a local little food stand where she would sell Salvadoran food. And so very early on, I was always involved in kind of that hustle that it took. And then coming to this country, it took me a lot of adapting because I knew zero English. I knew zero about the culture. And so I had to learn the language from zero, and I had to learn the culture straight from zero. Strangely enough, I never learned how to, I never took an ESL class. I never took anything like that. Everything was just out of adaptability. Just adapting to my environment as a very young kid. And then slowly but surely I started making friends everywhere I went. And, a few decades later, my father worked at a plumbing company, and my mom gave him the idea one day and said, "Hey, I see, with how good you are at plumbing, I see 6 vans out in our driveway, and that kind of planted the seed for my father to start the business, which is now International Plumbing." And so my mom was sort of like the visionary, and my father was kind of like the skill. And so I saw from a very early young age what it took to build it from the ground up. And I was also very heavily involved. Being out in the ditches with my father, and out of that effort, I was very determined and very hardworking when I was in high school. My thing growing up was soccer. I was an athlete. Soccer was the number one thing. I breathed, lived, bled for soccer, and my dream was to be a professional soccer player. Like most soccer players, we always dream about taking that extra step. And for a minute, I thought it was a possibility because I got a scholarship for soccer. I played Division II for 2 years. And being in college really opened up my eyes to other opportunities, and yeah, I learned a lot of things, textbook stuff about business, but it was always business that motivated me and that caught my interest and my curiosity. And so business itself, from a standpoint of like textbook business, was pretty boring. I was really hands-on when it came to learning about business and learning the things that make a business run. And so that's when I started dabbling into Forex trading. I started learning about, you know, sales, and I started learning about marketing, which were really the things that caught my attention the most. And long story short, I dropped out of college because I just didn't see myself following the path that everyone wanted me to follow. And so it was a big step for me to say, I'm going to drop out of college and just kind of like figure things out. But again, I had to adapt, right? Just like a little 6-year-old coming to a whole nother country and adapting to the language, adapting to culture, I had to adapt now that my plan had gone to shreds, right? Like the plan of going 4 years to college, getting a degree, trying to make it pro if you can with soccer. And if that doesn't work out, what's next, right? So you're from zero, ground up, starting all over again. And so coming back from college at that time was not easy. Mentally, it took a big toll on me to say, okay, all my dreams are out the door. I have to create new ones from scratch. And so, man, I'll tell you what, my parents gave me 2 weeks to figure something out or I was out the door. So, they gave me 2 weeks. Bernardo, you got 2 weeks. You got bills to pay. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. All right. So I went out. I started filling out applications. I got my tie. I got my suit, from, cheap H&M or whatever at that time. Started going to interviews. And I set a schedule of myself. And I set goals and expectations of myself during this process. And I landed across, the very first part of business, the very easiest part of business to get into is sales. Number one. Okay. That's a very entry level position at any business, sales. And so, most of my interviews were for sales positions, for sales roles. And so, when you think about sales, it's very uncomfortable to think about, going up to somebody, talking to them, and then convincing them to give you their money. But for me, it was more so, okay, is there a problem that I can help solve? And if so, how much is that worth? Okay. And that's kind of what got me into sales. So I worked a couple of sales roles here and there, kind of got used to talking to people, right? Without thinking that, my head's going to get chopped off if I'm talking to people. And so I worked a couple of sales roles here and there. Then I went into a bank. I worked for a bank for a couple months. And being young and naive, I left the bank too. And then because primarily I saw my father building his business. And at that point, he would be working out on the field. He would come home and he would be working on the computer. And so being that I had learned sales and I had learned, worked in banking and kind of seen how money flows within a large corporation, that's kind of what led me to drop the job and tell my dad, I want to be a part of this business. I want to help. And so at that point, the company was a very early stage. I came in, I adapted a lot of what I adopted a lot of what I had learned, through my trial and error positions. And we took that, that small little truck that we started with, we took it into now what's going on 10 vans and 30 employees. So, being in that position of being in that blue collar industry, it's hard labor. It's hard labor at the very beginning. And you got to wear many different hats. I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs can relate to, is that not only are you in charge of delivering the value or the service, you're in charge of looking for business. You're in charge of sales. You're in charge of marketing, operations, accounting. Like at the very beginning of a business, that's the very thing that you have to do. You have to wear many different hats. And oftentimes you're scrambling, trying to learn everything all at once, but that's where that adaptability really does come in. So that's something that I can really attest to, that having that skill set or that mindset of adaptability and versatility is what will keep you going, will get you going at the very least, right? But at some point, you got to delegate. And at some point, you have to see how to go from a hustler, to a CEO, right? So that process we saw too when we moved into an office, and we started hiring project managers, and then the project managers will oversee the field work going on the commercial side, and that's basically how we took, a a one-man truck to now a 30-man business. So just do a little pause here, and then that whole journey of taking a small operation to now a medium-sized operation. The key lesson there is that, and I have it wrote it down here, is that versatility is born from necessity. When resources are tight, your only option is to become multi-skilled. So that's the biggest lesson that I can take out of that journey. So yeah, I was in the journey of building a plumbing company with my family. Opened the door for myself to reinvent myself. And there's very interesting. There's a quote on the Robert Greene's book, The Laws of Power, I think it's called. I don't know. Do you know that book? No. Okay, it's a really good book. It's called I think there's like certain amount of laws. What is it called? Yeah, it's called the 48 Laws of Power. That's the book. And basically the book just tells you, how to get power basically as an individual. And law number 25 is recreate yourself. Recreate yourself with a powerful new image that stands out and draws attention rather than letting others define you. So not so much is it like an external thing where, okay, I got to reinvent myself so that other people see me differently now. More so, it was more of a reinventing a journey that I wanted to take out on my own. And so I wanted to develop more skill sets, and I wanted to learn other industries, other businesses out there, that I could always come back and apply to, the family business. So that's when I started dabbling into, more marketing and more social media, advertising. I started learning about, Google SEO, how can a small business apply that, to see growth in sales and in brand value. So, I attended plenty of seminars very early on. I invested a lot of my early money in courses and in events. I got to see Ty Lopez in California, and I took a funny story. I actually took a train from Virginia all the way to Cali. It was like a 3-day train. I ran into a bunch of different problems, but it wasn't conventional. But I wanted to make it happen, and so I put up with all the things that would normally, you wouldn't normally put up with when you're traveling. But got a ton of value out of that event. I brought it home, and I applied it to kind of the things that I wanted to experiment with social media marketing. And at first, I thought, I'm gonna let me create a side business and provide social media marketing to other companies, right? And at that time, it didn't work. Number one was because I hadn't fully developed the ability of selling on a mass scale. So, selling maybe one-on-one, getting through the door, talking in person, that's usually more natural. But selling at scale, how can you sell a product or a service at scale? That's a different conversation that I hadn't developed yet. So, but long story short, fast forward now with the technology and the opportunities available, I built a SaaS business. So with that complemented social media marketing and advertising services. So I built an agency, a digital marketing agency. So we were fundamentally making websites, creating social media campaigns, and working with small startups or small businesses on their brands. And on top of that, we would sell a software that we were able to white label. And that's what really drove the value for these businesses, because not only are you providing a consultation for small businesses, but you're also giving them the tools to manage their business much easier. So that's really where the value came in, and that's where digital marketing and social media business kind of went off. And so along with that, you know, I was also very curious about ATMs and payment processing. And this is kind of where it all just kind of, keeping an open mind and having different levels of curiosity kind of leads, opens doors a lot of the times, right? So I was curious about ATMs and payment processing, and at first it was, okay, how many ATMs can I put into a business? An ATM, you put cash into the machine, it feeds out fees, and that's how you make your money. Very simple. So, I had 3 little ATMs here locally, and, they were making money off of the fees, all while complementing the business with my social media marketing services and websites. And I would delegate this all to my team. So all I had to do was find the business owners. And so, it was kind of like a full service kind of thing. And then I ran into the problem. Well, I can't really scale these ATMs at the pace that I would like, because not only do I have to handle the equipment, I have to handle the cash as well that goes into the ATM. So I'm limited when it comes to having to be physically present. And there's different types of income. There's passive income, there's earned income, there's semi-passive income, there's profit income, royalty income. There's all types of income, but for this podcast, I want to just keep it focused on 3 different types of income. So earned income, passive income, and semi-passive income. So earned income is the income that you make from working a job, right? You have to put in your hours in order to get rewarded with a monetary value. A passive income is something where you purchase an asset and it generates money for you. A semi-passive income is where it's a mix of both earned and and passive. So you have to invest your time to a certain extent in order to generate the income. And so ATMs was a very semi-passive income because I had to be there. I had to be present. I had to be local. Because of the machines, because of the cash, and that was very limiting. Because if I wanted to, tell my wife, let's go on a trip, it's got to be limited because I got the machines to come back to, and I got to feed the machines and the cash. So that's why I decided to sell the entire portfolio. And in selling that entire portfolio, I opened the doors to credit card processing, because credit card processing is a whole nother ball game, really, because not only is the market adapting credit card payments at a much quicker rate than cash payments. I mean, cash payments are declining year over year. But with credit card processing, okay, I could have a credit card machine put into a business, let it sit, and just collect money off of the fees. That's much better than having to service the machine every 30 days with cash, or something like that, or servicing the machine because it broke or something along those lines. So that was a much better form of true passive income, where you put up a little bit of effort and money up front, and then you kind of sit back and just collect money off the fees. So essentially that's the model that I went with. And at that time I was still building Viva Web Marketing, which was the agency at that time. the digital marketing agency. And so what I would do is I would complement my marketing services with the payment services. So I would go to a business and I would say, hey, listen, this is what we can do for you. If you just started your business, okay, you got to market your business online. Okay, let's get you set up with a Google profile, a website, a clean social media presence. Let's talk about your brand, your mission statement, and let's put it all together so that people can find you online. And on top of that, I'll even give you a payment processor so you can collect my credit card payments as well. And because these were startups and these were, smaller size businesses, they would be like, yeah, sure, I'll take a payment processor. So that's how I got started early on with the industry. Once I decided to sell Viva Web Marketing as well, it opened the door for me to just focus on payment processing. And in doing so, it let me focus on earning, on talking to bigger businesses and collecting bigger deals for payment services. And so that's where I'm at now. And, along the way, the whole lesson is, hey, if you're going to fail forward. There's very early on in your 20s, you're probably not going to have it all figured out. Now, there's a few, there's a couple of entrepreneurs that know right off the bat, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is where I'm going to, this is where I'm going to settle. For me, it wasn't like that. I had to try many different things before I figured out, okay, this is kind of like the business model that suits me for the goals and things that I want to accomplish in life. And so that's where I've been at. And, opening up this podcast is just going to allow me to share with all of you kind of the mindset and the technicalities of running many different kinds of businesses and dabbling into different business models. So in transitioning from plumbing to marketing to ATMs to payments, right? The lesson there is every reinvention creates leverage. Adaptability gives you optionality, and optionality ultimately creates freedom. So that's the key lesson from transitioning from plumbing to trying out these other side hustles until landing upon one business model that truly works. And along the way, it's not easy. It's not easy trying to juggle many different things at one time. I know that's probably one critique that I'll get from, or that I have gotten from, several different mentors and such, right? And it doesn't come without its struggles. So, for example, how do you deal with the conflicting decision of, okay, I got one client that needs plumbing, and then I got another client that needs payments at the same time, so really it's about, can I have the team in place to delegate certain things to, and can I have the systems as well in place for my customers to have easy access to my products or my services, so having systems, automations in place, and having some level of organization makes things a little bit easier and more convenient, really, for an entrepreneur who's wearing many different hats, for an entrepreneur who's juggling a lot at the very same time, and burnout is another struggle that a lot of entrepreneurs also deal with. It's burning out where, okay, I'm doing a lot of the stuff. It's taking up a lot of my day, and then I crash, and I get decision fatigue. All of a sudden, I'm just making decisions without thinking about them. My efficiency is running low, and my energy levels are running low. And then all of a sudden, I'm not making the high level decisions that I need to make on a daily basis. So, yeah, burnout is a thing, very difficult, And part of it, I think, is, again, with the whole wearing many different hats, I think you got to be able to do more of the things that you enjoy, about a business. Um, a lot of entrepreneurs get into business at first because they enjoy what they do. Whether it's cooking, if they enjoy cooking, they're going to open up a restaurant. If they enjoy manual labor, if they like, building decks or building things with their hands, they'll start a construction business. Um, but at that same time, you can run a self-employed business, and be totally fine, right? You can just find jobs, do the work all yourself, and just be completely fine. You'll have a different set of problems to deal with, but ultimately you can be fine. But a lot of people get into business because they want the freedom that comes with it. They want the spoils that come with it, freedom and all that stuff. And in order to do that, you run into a lot of the obstacles that I'm highlighting right now. And yeah, more struggles to avoid burnout. I think you got to really do the things that you enjoy doing, even if it takes paying someone to delegate stuff to, or investing into a system that will automate your sales or automate your marketing. Whether it's upgrading your payment equipment, to make it easier for your employees to accept payments and to run the business, right? So a lot of those decisions, you got to make as you grow. And growing isn't always comfortable. Growing isn't always easy. But a lot of times, hard decisions are needed in order to be able to grow, right? So I always like to have, and especially with hustle culture these days, it's kind of like, you hop on social media, and if you're a business owner, if you're like an entrepreneurship, the first thing you see pop up on your social media is, okay, you got to be hustling more, you got to be selling 24/7, and that ultimately leads to burnout, right? So social media will tell you that success is all the way up here. You have to have all these things in order to be successful, right? And then you're caught chasing and chasing, and it's a never-ending cycle of chasing things that society tells you that you need, but that really aren't fulfilling you, right? So that's a whole nother thing that leads to burnout. And so just being conscious about what truly fulfills you, why you got into business in the first place, you know? My dad, for example, he got into business because he really enjoyed helping people. Like he enjoyed a good day's work where he was able to make someone's day better. He was able to stop that leak from destroying an old lady's house, for example. And then, sometimes he wouldn't even get paid for it. Like he wouldn't even ask for money. He was happy just getting a coffee and having a good conversation with someone, and those are kind of the lessons that I take out of seeing my father do what he did. And that's why it doesn't burden him, having this responsibility and having the business doesn't burden him, because he enjoys the impact that it leaves for the people that are involved. So yeah. And so, to wrap up this segment and this episode, um, I just want to leave, the viewers or the listeners, with just, the key focus of this episode, which is adaptability and versatility. You know, uh, Adapting in business and in life is very necessary, not only to grow, but to survive. You know, um, I think that if you have that mindset of adaptability, you can really survive in any environment, especially in failure, right? Because if you're doing something and it's not working, right, eventually you're going to be faced with the decision of, do I keep going or do I keep trying? right? And having an adaptability mindset can honestly allow you from cutting your losses short and adapting to something that might be what you're looking for, you know? So again, with, the way that I relate to it is coming to a country, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, being able to adapt to the language, to the culture, led me to have and meet a lot of great people, a lot of great friends who, I still know today, you know? And it's because, well, I got to adapt to this environment, and I have to open up my mind to meeting people, talking to people, which is outside of my comfort zone. And the same thing in business, and adapting to very hard situations and in the middle of failure. Sometimes you got to put your ego and your pride aside to say, this isn't working. I have to find the people and the resources that will help me get the outcome that is needed, and that's the hard thing. In a lot of businesses and a lot of business owners is that they're unwilling to adapt. They're unwilling to change, because the fear of failure. They got to a certain point doing things the way that they're used to. At some point, it doesn't work anymore, and they get this wall of pride that they can't get rid of, and a lot of times it leads the business to failure just because of the simple fact that, okay, I'm not willing to adapt, I'm not willing to change because I'm afraid of failure, and ultimately that happens. What is that law? There's a law called, no, not the law of attraction. It's a theory that the more scared you are of something, the more likely it's going to happen. Can't remember what it's called. No, that's a good one though. I would definitely talk about the law of attraction. But it's called the more scared you are of something, the more likely it's going to happen.
Murphy's Law?
Murphy's Law, yeah, that one. Murphy's Law. So having that adaptability, having that mindset, open mindset, being able and willing to say, okay, I failed. Okay, let's start over, right? I mean, I've had to do that from dropping out of college, from dropping different careers, from dropping different kind of business models to now where I am now. I've had to do that all my life, and I can honestly say that no failure really stings me to the point where I say, okay, I can't get up from this. And it's because of that adaptability mindset. So I encourage you, viewer or listener, to see where you can apply that mindset, in your life, in your business. Is there anything that needs to be adopted in your personal life or in your business? Is there maybe something that would benefit you to change, but you don't want to change because of fear of failure or whatever? And yeah, share it with us in the comments or DM us. And I'm hoping to bring on many other guests on this podcast to talk about their story, to talk about, challenges in business and areas where they've had to adapt in order to grow. And so I'm hoping that you guys can stay tuned to this podcast, subscribe, like, follow, and be on the watch out for the next one. I'm excited to continue sharing more stories of success and how it applies to business. Thank you all. See you next time.